So, as not to offend my atheist friends, in the following transcript, when you hear the term God, please substitute the phrase universe's intelligence. I have been thinking for quite a while about how the universe was created and what the relationship between the universe and the reality we live in might be to God. It seems that there are a couple of possibilities. First, God might exist separately from the universe as an entity, and then God created the universe as we know it today. Another possibility is that God is actually the universe itself, meaning that all of the matter, energy, people, and intelligence in the universe are manifestations of God, with God being a superintelligence that governs how all of that works. Eventually, after thinking about this, another possibility occurred to me. We might actually be living in God's mind. For those of you who are fans of the simulation idea or the Matrix, where people think they are living inside a computer simulation, this concept is somewhat similar, except that we would actually be existing in God's mind. So how does this work? We have God, and of course nobody really understands what that is. For those of you who are atheists, think of it as an intelligence in the universe. Then we have the universe itself, which appears to be a physical manifestation. So, how do we get from one point, God as intelligence, to the other point, the physical manifestation of the universe? If we are living in God's mind, it merely requires God to think it, and then everything is created as we know it. Since we are living within that creation, we do not realize that we are inside it. The implementation of what God is thinking is perfect. By perfect, I mean that all of the laws of physics, the particles, the energy, the interactions, and the fact that you can throw a ball into the air and it drops back to the earth all work perfectly. The composition of matter, with atoms and subatomic particles, is something we understand extremely well, at least to an extent. It behaves as a perfectly implemented system. Matter can be created in many forms. Iron can be created, wood can be created, and many other materials as well. When this matter is created, such as a bowling ball or a steel ball bearing, it is extraordinarily stable. It could sit there for 1,000,000 years and not change, unless the rules of physics, or at least the way we understand them, would cause it to change. For instance, the atoms that make up the steel ball bearing could slowly migrate in some way and eventually distort the shape of the ball if that correlates with the laws of physics. So, in that sense, it is a perfect implementation. It is also an incredibly complex and beautiful simulation, or perhaps a better word would be implementation, because the intricacies of everything and how it all works are magnificent. The size of the universe is almost inconceivable to humans. We have calculated that there may be something like 1,000,000,000 galaxies in the universe and roughly 1,000,000,000 stars in each galaxy. Of course, this varies from galaxy to galaxy, but when you do the math, you find that there is an enormous number of stars in the universe. On the small scale, there are things so tiny that humans have never directly seen them. We understand the models of atoms and quantum physics, and they work astoundingly well. But much of this has not been directly observed. We are simply not able to see the smallest things in the universe. How is it possible to have such an extraordinary range from the very small to the very large? If God is creating the universe, there is really no limit to what God can create, because it is merely a matter of thinking it into existence. If God wants a universe that is infinite, so be it. God's universe could be infinite because God's mind is infinite. If God wants something infinitesimally small, that can exist as well. So, the implementation of the universe is formed by a kind of fabric or foundation. I believe this foundation is the energy of the universe, which could be the manifestation of God's mind. Looking at what quantum physicists and cosmologists believe about the structure of the universe, space-time appears to be that fundamental underlying structure or energy that permeates everything everywhere. Even in a vacuum, in empty space, space-time still exists. That space-time is composed of extremely small units of energy. In fact, there is nothing in the universe except energy. Matter, composed of protons, electrons, quarks, and other subatomic particles, is ultimately made of energy. When you look at matter, it appears solid. For example, when I hold a ball bearing in my hand, I can feel the metal and its solid nature. To me, it does not appear to be energy. But beneath that appearance is a structure of atoms vibrating constantly. Why are they vibrating? Because they are made of energy. I suggested previously that we are unable to see certain things in the universe because of their size. We are allowed to see and measure and test and experience some things in the universe, even some that are very small. But we are not able to see the smallest things, such as space-time itself, nor are we able to see the subatomic particles that make up matter. We can get a fuzzy glimpse at some of the particles, but we certainly can't see a vivid, clear image. Why can't we see the smallest things in the universe? First of all, we can't see them because they are energy and are constantly vibrating. But I have an additional theory that we can't see them because they are the manifestation of God's mind, and to see them would be providing direct insight into that. And there are certain things that God does not want us to know or understand. It also seems like it would create some paradoxes for us. Likewise, when we try to look at the largest things in the universe, such as the outer fringes of the universe, we can't see that far. In fact, even with our most powerful telescopes, we can only get a certain amount of clarity in the images. Again, I believe we are not currently meant to understand certain things on a macro level. In fact, I feel there are many things that God does not want us to know. Perhaps in the future, this will change, and we will begin to understand more of the universe's secrets. In my lifetime, I've gone through various stints of different religions such as Christianity and Buddhism, and there was a point where I was a self-declared atheist for a large part of my younger life. I would not say that I am currently religious. That is, I don't believe in or practice a given religion with the shared beliefs, practices, rituals, and rules regarding that religion. I do believe there is a God. Some may say there is no God, only the universe's intelligence. Perhaps it is semantics, although in later discussions I hope to elaborate the difference. God is my term for it, and this God is an extremely intelligent entity beyond our comprehension, obviously extremely intelligent in order to fabricate this world that we live in, and the reality that we see, and the laws of nature that work perfectly well. While I am not a religious person, I do find it interesting to consider some of the texts that have been written through the ages by different religions. Were these writings inspired by God? Was there direct communication from God explaining things? If not, then some of the writers must have been very astute. Let's look at some examples. The first is the creation of the universe itself. In many religions, the belief is that God created the universe from nothing. In other words, there was no matter or pre-existing substance. In the Judaism Old Testament, the creation of the universe is often characterized as God bringing the universe into existence by spoken word. In other words, He thought it, and it was so. There are many examples of this, such as "let there be light." Interestingly, light is energy, and now we know that everything in the universe is energy. The next interesting example is the creation of mankind. Again, in the Old Testament, roughly translated from the Hebrew, it says, "And God created the human in His image. In the image of God He created him. Male and female He created them." This is interesting. God created the human in His image. However, I have a hard time believing that God looks like a man or a woman, or that God necessarily has any physical form or shape resembling a human being. Instead, I believe that if the writer of this passage was somehow inspired to convey its meaning, what the writer may have intended is that God created humans with the likeness of God in terms of intelligence. God, being the superintelligence of the universe, has imparted intelligence to creatures and even to plants. God has granted the greatest intelligence to humans, allowing them to think, reason, and imagine. And, by the way, humans are able to dream. I don't know about you, but my dreams are extraordinarily vivid. They are so vivid that I often believe whatever I am dreaming is actually happening. When I look at all the detail in my dreams, it seems real. So real that sometimes despair can arise from disturbing situations within the dream. Therefore, humans really do reflect the same kind of intelligence as God, with the ability to imagine and dream, similar to how God's mind manifests the universe and the reality we live in. To us, we are not aware that we might be living in God's mind, because everything appears perfectly reasonable, including all the laws, rules, and everything we see, matter, colors, and physical interactions. How does our brain work? On energy, of course. It all seems entirely real to us. When you consider the intelligence of the universe, or of God, it is an immense intelligence. But it is also a collective intelligence. Take the planet Earth, for example. Consider the ant. An ant has a brain the size of a pinhead, an extremely tiny brain. yet that ant is capable of performing intelligent tasks. The colony communicates with one another, they have assigned duties, and each individual ant represents a form of intelligence. Now take that one ant and multiply it by the number of ants on planet Earth. Suddenly you realize that there is an enormous amount of intelligence represented by ants alone. Now, consider all of the birds, reptiles, primates, humans, and other creatures, and combine them together. When you do that, you end up with an immense amount of intelligence existing just on the planet Earth. Let's look at another example of a religion which seemed to somehow understand how the universe works. Zen Buddhists believe there's a lively energy that permeates the universe and also in oneself. This energy is often interpreted as some kind of buzzing or vibrating sense in the body. Well, Buddhism has been around for, let's say, 2,500 years. 2,500 years ago, I don't think anyone understood the fundamental structure of the universe, or that any matter that you see is really just energy in another form. So everything surrounding us really is vibrating or buzzing energy. Buddhists attempt to tune into this energy through meditation. How did they know that this energy existed? Can they really sense it? Let's look at another example. This one from Judaism. It's actually the Old Testament, also adopted by Christians. In the First Testament, Genesis, there's the Garden of Eden incident, where Adam and Eve were forbidden to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. In other words, according to the common translation of what this means, humans should not consume the tree of knowledge, because it means that they are going to deviate from God and take on the lifestyle of being ungodly and being evil and going off on their own. This is really interesting because I think that previous civilizations, or let's say even ancient civilization, had a better connection with God. In fact, since we're living in God's mind and we also have the intelligence in our mind, could it be that we possibly have a more direct connection to God than we realize? Instead, we've evolved over time and we've lost that innate ability to communicate and make that direct connection to God. Going back to this example of the tree of knowledge, what if the tree of knowledge actually really does represent knowledge? Let's look at modern day. In modern day, we are surrounded by technology. We are surrounded by knowledge. We have knowledge at our fingertips now. The younger generations, in some cases, choose to live in an alternate reality where that knowledge creates a fictional existence. They're not connected to reality. In a sense, we are moving away from any connection to God to a world of knowledge. I'll make a joke about this. Taking a bite out of the apple, is that an iPhone 16 or what are they talking about there? But all jesting aside, I believe that this movement towards technology and knowledge is a movement away from reality, from God, and the more healthier choice of living in reality, and enjoying the universe that we live in, instead of attempting to avoid it. Again, I wouldn't say I aspire to any particular religion. I'm not sure that I'm a religious person, but I do believe in this supreme intelligence, which I refer to as God. Over the years, I've wondered about religious people and their relationship with God. I've also wondered if people believe that they can communicate with God. I don't really understand how they feel about that relationship, or whether they feel they can communicate. I wonder if it is a one- or two-way communication with most people. The reason I raise this is, again, I feel that perhaps in an ancient society or evolution of humans, that we may have had the ability to communicate more easily with God. If we are living in God's mind, and we are in the image of God, and we are also intelligent, can our mind somehow be connected to God's mind? And does that mean that we have the ability to communicate through a direct channel, essentially, call it a high-speed fiber connection? Well, I think that it is possible to communicate with God. And that's really where I'm headed with this series regarding reality God and our connection to both. So, if you find this interesting, please give me a thumbs up. I know that the venue I'm using, YouTube, is probably not suited for the way I'm delivering this, which is really a podcast. And I've always complained about people who create YouTube videos that aren't actually videos. But I really wanted to get this to the widest audience possible in order to get some feedback regarding further interest. Is there a possibility that we're living in God's mind? Can we test it? Can we learn from it? Sequels to this video will include more thoughts about how the communication could or might work between us and God. Thank you.